I'm Jennifer Della Quadri, and this is Subtle Shifts, the podcast where you'll learn how to transform your life from the inside out, one small, meaningful shift at a time. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are going to be diving into a topic that is actually quite personal to me, and that is breaking free from good girl conditioning and understanding the effects of patriarchal trauma, something I had never even heard of until just recently. As you know, I am a Gen X woman, and I've been very clear about the fact that I have spent years struggling with feelings of just not being good enough, not doing enough. And throughout it all, I just kept blaming myself for what was going on. Like, this is something I'm doing. This is something that I've created, a habit that I have. And then I found Lauren Redding. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about where those feelings for us women come from. And more importantly, and of course, we're going to talk about how to manage them and how to heal from them. Lauren is a licensed clinical social worker, and she's also a doctoral candidate. And she's bringing her expertise and insights in this conversation. Throughout our conversation, we talk about societal conditioning that pushes women to be compliant and quiet and self-sacrificing, and how this manifests in burnout, anxiety, and just that nagging sense of unworthiness. Lauren is going to share with you actionable strategies for rewiring your nervous system and practicing self-compassion and reconnecting with your authentic self. I always like to have people on this show who can offer insights and strategies that are new to me. And in all of these years in psychology and coaching and education, this is something that is new to me. And Lauren is an expert. You're not going to want to miss this episode, especially if you feel like you might struggle with good girl conditioning. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Lauren. I am so excited to have you here and this discussion that is so essential for so many women to hear. And I just wanted to give you a moment before I dive into the questions that I have to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be on and to be able to talk about this. My name is Lauren Redding. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. I practice in, I specialize in helping women process trauma, particularly trauma that comes from living in a patriarchal society, which is what we're going to talk about today. I also am getting my doctorate at Rutgers University, Doctor of Social Work, and I have a Taylor Swift podcast with my sister called TheraSwifts, where we kind of talk about Taylor Swift and mental health. So yeah, I got a couple different things going on.
So fun. And I wanted to invite you on the show because I'm a Gen X woman, and I'm learning a lot about my conditioning and how much it's impacted who I am and how I show up in the world, specifically around behaviors, self-sabotaging behaviors that I have always blamed myself for. And I know that my audience can relate on so many levels, which is why I thought it would be so good to have someone come on who really has a background with these conditioning issues. Yeah. It's so many of us women have experienced. So, and I love that you have a Taylor Swift podcast. Like,
thank you.
You take your interest and you put it with your passions, and what a wonderful way to help the world. So
yeah,
I will for sure have a link to that as well, because
Thank
that's so fun.
Swifties are deeply feeling people.
Yes.
So it's a good intersection.
For sure. It's a really good overlap. So let's get into the discussion. So Tell me a little bit, in case someone in my audience, this is brand new to them. They've never heard of good girl conditioning. So tell me first what it is and how it might show up in women's lives.
Sure. So, good girl conditioning is one of the ways that we see patriarchal trauma manifest in women's lives. So, maybe it'd be helpful to just take a step back and define that first. Interesting, we don't really have a solid like Webster's dictionary definition of patriarchal trauma. There's a couple different working ideas of it. Dr. Valerie Ryan has done a lot of research, and she coined this term patriarchy stress disorder. It's like actually she says something that could be diagnosed to describe the collective trauma, the intergenerational trauma of women's oppression, essentially. Dr. Michelle Justice defines patriarchal trauma as an act causing mental anguish to a woman, specifically perpetrated against her because she is a woman. My working definition, based on what I see in my clinical practice, basically patriarchal trauma is the emotional, psychological, and physical impact of living in a world that devalues women and seeks to control them. So it's essentially the accumulated harm of patriarchy passed down through families, institutions, society. And one of the ways that we see it manifest is good girl syndrome. So that essentially refers to the socialization of women starting when we're very young, starting when we're girls, to be submissive, quiet, compliant, people-pleasing, self-abandoning. Essentially, little girls learn in a lot of different ways very early how to be small and how to not take up space. So that's how I would define good girl conditioning. And it's interesting, like I think it even starts before birth. You know, these gender constructs are so ingrained in our society. And I know I have clients who have daughters, and they've told me, I've heard this from multiple women, that they were pregnant with little girls, and when they were in ultrasounds and the girls were not, how do I want to say it? When they were doing ultrasounds and the tech couldn't get a good image because the baby had an arm up or was turned, that the techs would be like, oh, she is stubborn. Like, she does not want to listen today. I have a son. Nobody said that to me, and he absolutely would not cooperate during ultrasounds. That was okay because he was a boy, and he was and is socialized to be able to take up space in a way that little girls just are not.
That's so interesting. And I had heard of good girl syndrome before, and it's so eye-opening. And this is why I invited you on. I saw one of the posts that you had on Instagram that was talking about the symptoms of patriarchal trauma. Yeah. And I saw all of the symptoms, and I was like, yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. All of them. And I had never heard of patriarchal trauma before. I didn't even know it was a thing. But once I heard that term, it made so much sense. And 50 years of my life, I've been operating from, you are a woman, this is how women should be, this is how moms should be.
Oh, yeah.
All the way back to this is how a little girl should be.
Yep.
And just to first, before we even get into the symptoms and how to address it, just to first sit with the idea that all of these things that we women struggle with, it's something that's been handed down to us and given to us, and it's completely not been within our awareness or control in any way.
Yep.
And so many women, and this is probably part of the conditioning, are self-blaming for when they don't measure up.
Yeah.
When they're not small, when they're too loud, when they speak their voice, they are blaming themselves for doing it wrong, or it's a personal failure. And it's completely based on just the messaging that they've received from society. And that is a huge weight that we are all carrying. It's an invisible weight.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So thank you for explaining that. Really helps kind of put an understanding on what it is that we're talking about here. So let's now talk a little bit about how this conditioning and the patriarchal trauma actually impacts women. So what types of ways do you see that coming out in your practice?
It's a great question. It's patriarchal trauma is complex because people are complex, and I think it intersects with a lot of other systems of oppression, so white supremacy, homophobia, and so there isn't like one way that it shows up, but I would say there's a couple overarching things that I see with my clients. So one is what we talked about of just like that conditioning to be small and compliant. The patriarchy figured out very early that the best way to keep women in line is to socialize them from the beginning to be nice and non-confrontational. So certainly just that idea that women are supposed to be deferential, it shows up that way. For a lot of women, our worthiness is tied to our ability to conform to these gender-based norms and to these expectations of womanhood, of motherhood. And so when you aren't able to meet these expectations because they're ridiculous and so confining, there can be a lot of shame. There can be a lot of self-hatred. There's certainly internalized, patriarchy that women can for sure hold. I think I also see a ton of people-pleasing and a ton of self-abandonment. Women learn very early that we are supposed to put others' needs before our own. I even think about like little girls playing with baby dolls. Like, again, from very, very early, we learn that we are nurturers. We are supposed to take care of others. And women often, I think more so than men, I would say, grow up with this innate need to please other people. And that often means sacrificing our own needs and our own wants. Which then gets you into this terrible cycle of burnout and resentment and depression and anxiety, where really when we go in and start to untangle all of that, it comes back to this idea of like, my self-worth is tied to my ability to meet other people's needs, and I can't ever fully meet people's needs. So how do we shift the focus back to meeting your needs and tying your self-worth to that?
That is, it's so true. I see this in my clients all of the time. It's the burnout really is a huge symptom. Anxiety for sure, depression, withdrawal, and it's coming from a place of I'm not meeting society's expectations. I'm a failure. I'm doing it wrong. I'm not good enough is at the core of it. And the not good enough is based on expectations that were set by people that aren't even around anymore.
Sure.
All right.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, then if you think about sort of what's happening at the moment politically, we have generations of women right now alive who are overwhelmed and burnt out and completely flooded just by trying to live up to these expectations every day. And so we can't engage effectively politically. That's really where my practice shifted. For the last 3 years, I had very much been focused on maternal mental health and trauma, always practicing from this feminist lens. And then when the election happened, and it went not the way so many of us thought it would, all of my clients suddenly had this awareness of like, I know I need to be speaking up and fighting back, but I have no energy to. It's like, yeah, because that's how the system is designed. That's exactly what they want. They want us to be exhausted and burnt out.
Right. It's so true. And also the burning desire to speak out and to say something, but the huge amounts of fear that comes with it as a result of the conditioning.
Totally. Yeah, I think another important point, one way that patriarchal trauma manifests is gender-based violence. And so a lot of women, were once little girls growing up in a house with an angry dad. I think that is a trope that a lot of women are familiar with. Taylor Swift has a song about it in Seven, a song called Seven. And so for a lot of women, when we were little girls, our people pleasing and our ability to stay small was tied to our safety. It was a way that we were able to keep ourselves safe. And so then when we are in the world as adult women and we feel like, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Basically, when we're adult women and that good girl syndrome shows up, anytime that we try to defy that or be like, no, I can't speak my mind, I can't take up space, that's connected to, well, you're not going to be safe. And so that sort of triggers a fight or flight response. And then that's where a lot of the shutdown happens. We know tons of research that people who live chronically in fight or flight, which I feel like most women are, as a result, partially from patriarchal trauma, they have chronic health problems. And so I think I have so many clients with all kinds of chronic health conditions that they're struggling with. And it's like, because your body is on red alert all the time. Because you're living in a society in which you're not safe.
Yes. It's manifesting in our behaviors, but ultimately it's impacting our nervous system and our inability and our ability to regulate ourselves. And how the whole, this is a question that there's no easy answer for, but this is what we grapple with, is how can I stay regulated even though my conditioning is telling me to run and hide or to stay quiet, or else I will be in danger, right? Like that is the challenge. And so let's shift gears then and talk a little bit about that. So let's start from like a very basic level. Someone is listening. They know that they have a dysregulated nervous system. They perhaps want to turn things around to stop being the good girl and stop struggling with the things they're struggling with. Where would you recommend that they start?
So I think if you are a person who has childhood trauma, and there's a big intersection for women here of good girl syndrome and childhood trauma, this is an area where working with a therapist is really helpful, particularly a therapist who's trained in a body-based somatic processing modality. So EMDR is my favorite. I'm trained in EMDR. I've done a ton of EMDR as a client. Brain spotting, ART, finding a good therapist who can help you do that nervous system work in a contained, safe space is really important, because when we're first starting out, in order to heal the trauma, we sort of have to reopen the wound. And if you don't have a therapist or someone there to kind of hold a safe space with you and help you regulate, it's really easy to just get overwhelmed and shut down. And then you're actually, you're just sort of re-traumatizing yourself. So I would say finding a therapist is good. But there are certainly lots of things that folks can do on their own. And I really encourage my clients to do a lot of strategies to continue the work that we do in session, during the week when we're not meeting. The two main parts of our brain that come into play when we're talking about trauma and fight or flight are the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain right behind the forehead. That's the logic center of the brain. And then we have the amygdala, which is the emotion center of the brain there in the back. And essentially, when we go into fight or flight, the amygdala takes over and we disconnect from the prefrontal cortex. So we can't access that part of the brain that holds logical thought. And that's why traumatic memory often feels different from non-traumatic memory, because we can't connect to the part of the brain that knows, okay, that was 20 years ago. You're not a little girl anymore. It's okay. We can't connect to that. The amygdala takes over and we're like instantly back in that 6-year-old body. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about nervous system regulation, what we're really talking about is strategies to reconnect the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Mm-hmm. When the amygdala is firing on its own, that's when we're in fight or flight. And that is the sympathetic nervous system taking over. What we want to do in reconnecting the prefrontal cortex is activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And so that's the opposite of fight or flight.
Yeah.
So EMDR is amazing. I mean, I just did it with a client for the first time this morning, and she was like, this is witchcraft. Like, what did we just do? Uh-huh. Which I should say, I always like to let people know that EMDR is a modality that, like so many other pieces of Western mental health, was appropriated from indigenous cultures. Okay. So these are very old techniques that white capitalist systems learned and now make a lot of money off of people like me getting trained in it. Mm-hmm. So I just like to always name that. But basically EMDR is a way to intentionally re-engage the prefrontal cortex, bring it back online while you are thinking about a traumatic memory, in order to do what we call reprocessing, which means you're able to think about the memory and not have that visceral, like, back of my 6-year-old body response. Mm-hmm. You're able to think about it and you're connected to the part of your brain that knows, I am safe now, I was very vulnerable then, but I'm not now, all those different pieces. So, from indigenous practices that then were translated into EMDR, we know that something called bilateral stimulation lights up both the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So back when EMDR was first developed, they figured out that the way to activate both parts of the brain is for the therapist to move their fingers and the client to watch, and it's the eye movement back and forth that's the bilateral stimulation. But we've since found out, especially during COVID when we couldn't be in person with clients, we figured out a lot of ways to translate bilateral stimulation, and the one that I do with clients is butterfly tapping. So just simply crossing your arms over each other and doing slow tapping. It is so simple. It sounds silly. What I'm doing right now, bilateral stimulation, it totally works. It activates the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is like, hold on, I was offline for a second. Let me come back on. Mm-hmm. Connects with the amygdala. The parasympathetic nervous system comes online and the distress comes down. Okay. So, I have clients do slow tapping anytime they're in distress over something like, I set a boundary that is very difficult for me because I know that the other person is going to be upset with me. And because of my childhood trauma, people being upset with me makes me feel unsafe because it wasn't safe. So I will have them do slow tapping and just do some affirmations of like, blank can be mad at me and I am okay. I can set hard boundaries and it's a good thing. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm taking care of myself. And basically what we're doing when we're saying those positive statements with the bilateral stimulation, you're sort of really making your brain absorb it in a way that it can't when the amygdala is kind of running rampant. So slow tapping is a really great strategy for folks who are trying to build up a tolerance for the distress that comes when we're learning how to shift our behavior, when we're learning to take up space and use our voice. It's very scary. It's very distressing. And
it is very scary. And that is a really accessible strategy, and also recognizing that the level of distress is going to be different for each person, for each situation. So somebody may be perfectly fine with setting boundaries, but maybe they're not so comfortable speaking up in front of a large group, right? Or somebody has never set a boundary before, and it is terrifying for them to do that. The work for them might just be, I'm setting a boundary with this one person, and I'm going to practice this technique to help me through it. And then the next time, maybe it'll be a little bit less distressing. So all of those good girl behaviors that we find ourselves doing, the I always have to put someone else first, the guilt and shame that comes up, is just soothing ourselves through those feelings and reassuring our nervous systems that we are still in fact safe. And doing that over and over as a practice.
Yeah, totally. Essentially what we're doing in those moments when we're reconnecting to our internal sense of safety, we are forming new neural networks. So I was taught this imagery that I always thought really fit. Our neural networks, think of them as like your brain is a field with like tall grass, and the neural networks are paths in the field that we have walked the path for our entire lives. So for, I'm 33, I've got 33 years worth of conditioning around my safety being tied to my being quiet. And so what I am having to do, and what we all have to do, is make new paths in the grass. And if you think about it, the first time that you walk in a path, it's not going to actually make a dent in the grass. But when you walk it enough, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, eventually that path gets easier to walk on, and the other one starts to get overgrown. So that's what we're doing. It really is a matter of practice. This is a skill, which is what I love about it. It's something that you can teach. And, it's a work in progress. Like, I do this for a living all day, every day. I'll still have times where I'll find myself, oh gosh, I was just dissociating. Like, wow, something happened, and okay, let me pause. Let me do some tapping. Let me get back on that path that I want to be on, that says you are safe, you are allowed to have needs, you are allowed to set boundaries, all that good stuff.
That's so important to address, is especially, I feel like many of the same people who are people pleasers and putting other people's needs first also tend to be high achievers, perfectionists. And the same nervous system response that would come with potential failure, potential judgment, and those things, this all works for that as well.
Absolutely.
It all starts with an awareness that there is something off. It's a reflection, like, hey, I don't feel good about this. Like, something is off. I'm tired. I'm anxious. I'm stressed out. I'm snapping at my kids. Whatever it is, there's some dysregulation, and we're aware of it. It sounds like that would be the first step.
It's like 80% of it. Just being able to name it when it happens.
Every day.
Every day, because it happens unconsciously and it happens instantly. So like, let me think of what a trigger for me is. I grew up in a house with a lot of domestic violence, and my room was in the basement. And so I was very attuned to footsteps. And that was my indicator of whether or not it was safe to go upstairs, what kind of mood my stepdad was in. And so I live in an apartment now. And when I moved in, for the first 6 months, nobody was above me. I'm on the first floor. And then somebody moved in. And I was getting so dysregulated. And it took me a minute to realize, and by a minute, it took me a couple weeks to realize that unconsciously I was registering the noise of the footsteps above me, and I was going into fight or flight.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even consciously aware of it, but it started to take a toll of like, my jaw really hurts. I feel like I've been clamping down my jaw, or I'm having stomach aches like I did when I was a little kid. Like, what is going on here? Yeah. So yeah, 80% of it, I feel like 80% of the work is just being able to figure out what the trigger is and naming it. Yeah. And then it's just practice. It's repetition. We are desensitizing ourselves to the stressor.
Yeah.
The trigger.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, I know that you've spoken a lot about childhood trauma. Could this also be something that is created later on, maybe when someone is older, even young adulthood or mid-adulthood?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the patriarchal trauma starts from birth, being a woman, being a girl, for sure. But a lot of the nervous system regulation that you're talking about, it comes from trauma itself. Yep. And being able to recognize in that story for you with the footsteps above you, that took a lot of really self-regulate or awareness just to even know, oh, there's something, it's not just me. It's not just a me thing. Yeah. It's not something I'm doing wrong, because so many people will go into, okay, I need to fix this. I'm going to meditate more. I'm going to go for a walk. And but the stressor's still there. You just don't realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I want to say too, something that I think has gotten missed in the other patriarchal trauma definitions that I mentioned at the beginning, they are very focused on the impacts on women. And absolutely, I think women bear the brunt of the impact of patriarchal trauma, but it absolutely harms men and boys too. I don't know if you've seen that new Netflix show, Adolescence.
Yes.
I made myself watch it over the weekend because I have a little boy and I want to know what he's up against. And it's the very same programming that forces little girls to be small that also doesn't allow for little boys to be soft. Yeah. So it harms us in different ways, but it's harmful to both boys and girls. Yeah. The difference is that, we don't have an epidemic of violence against men. We have an epidemic of violence against women and girls because this conditioning that both men and women experience is all centered around male dominance, right?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up too, because yes, the brighter or the broader challenge is the impact it has on women for sure. But even just the other day, I was speaking with a friend who has a teenage son, and the amount of awareness she's had around that same narrative that he has taken in, like men or boys their whole life are trained to be the opposite of a woman. You can't cry, you can't, show emotion, you have to hold it on, you got to be strong. Yet at the same time, they are to be in a relationship with a woman, the same person that they are told is less than, weak, not good enough, right? So there's got to be internal conflict there as well. It is basically a shit show.
Yeah, no, totally.
That impacts everyone.
Yeah.
And that's really worth acknowledging as well.
Yeah. These oppressive systems, patriarchy, white supremacy, they really all function to strip away a person's humanity. Like we are confined into these very specific boxes of what it looks like to be a woman or a man or white or black. And we're not allowed to experience things outside of those boxes. And it's interesting to consider, I think white women and women of color also experience patriarchal trauma differently.
Yeah.
Women of color, just in addition to facing higher rates of domestic violence, of childhood trauma, of poverty, on and on. There's people of color are disproportionately impacted. Mm-hmm. Women of color are socialized differently than white women in that they're not allowed to be soft. There's this idea of like the angry black woman kind of stereotype, and I've have a lot of black clients and friends who have talked about like one of the boxes that they have been put in is like, I'm not allowed to embrace rest and softness and tenderness. So it's just, it impacts all of us, certainly in, disproportionate ways, depending on what population we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, no one is allowed to embrace their full humanity, the full spectrum of emotions.
Yeah. It's so true. There's so much judgment around it. I'm curious, another thing that's coming to mind for me, one of the things that I always encourage my clients to do, and I can't even tell you the impact that it's made on my life. I don't think my life would look anything like what it does now if I hadn't learned it, is being proactive about having a mindfulness meditation practice.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily addressing trauma while you're in the practice, but I wonder too, just from your experience, what role would that be playing in this?
Yeah, so I think this is where inner child work really comes into play. I would say that that's more so what I encourage my clients to do, instead of like a traditional meditation, is to spend time with their little girl selves inside of them. So a practice that I've gotten into the habit of is every night before I go to sleep, I call it the huddle. I call up all my parts, all 16-year-old me and 6-year-old me and 32-year-old me from last year, and I imagine us all in a circle. Like I literally envision 15-year-old me holding baby me, and I put my arms around us, and I'm like, hey, we're gonna go to bed. I'm gonna tuck you all in. Like let's give kisses and hugs. Like it's time for bed. And then I imagine tucking in and going around, like almost like in Madeline.
Yes.
Like the little girls with their beds all in a row. I imagine myself going around and being like, you're safe. It's okay to go to sleep. I hope you have sweet dreams. So that kind of practice, I think, is meditation-like. And again, it's just all about, like when I'm doing that huddle, I'm forming those new neural pathways. So it's just a way to practice the skills outside of dysregulation.
Yeah.
Because when we're dysregulated, it's really hard to remember the skills because we can't connect to the part of our brain that has that information. I think you brought up a really good point. For sure, you can use these strategies when you feel dysregulated, but to really rewire your nervous system, you have to practice when you're not dysregulated, like in a calm, quiet moment.
Yeah, and that's where having a professional to guide you through can make all the difference. Mm-hmm. Even as a 50-year-old woman, I'm still sorting through the impact of growing up a female in the 80s and the narratives and the what you're expected to look like and be like and all of that. I'm still working through that in my therapy sessions. And I'm glad you brought up the parts. Of course, that would be a completely different podcast. Like we could definitely record another podcast because I'm just learning about that within the last few years. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, so that makes sense that I would be doing this because this is something that was created as a result of something that happened when I was young, right?
Yeah, totally. Trauma gets stored in our body at the age we were when it happened.
Yes.
So when I hear the footsteps, I immediately go back to being like 9.
Yeah.
Which was when my stepdad came onto the scene. Mm-hmm. And so part of doing the rewiring is identifying that part and this is really good for working with shame, because I think women often will go to like, oh, why is this still happening to me? Like, I've been working on this for years, or like, I'm crazy. What's going on?
Were you in my last therapy session?
That's what I talk about in mine too. But when you're able to shift it and say like, oh, little Lauren is really scared right now. Like, she is hearing those footsteps and she's thinking like it's not safe to go upstairs. And so it shifts to self-compassion and taking care and nurturing the parts of us which they usually are asking for nurturing that they didn't get in the moment, you know? So it's that inner child, inner, you know, parent, reparenting work goes really well with this.
So we scratched the surface on many things that we can do deep dives in, but I can imagine my audience is curious if you have any recommendations. Of course, I'll have you share how they can learn more from you and follow you, but are there any books or places where people can go and you're like, that would be a really great place for somebody to start if they want to learn more about this?
Dr. Valerie Ryan has a book that she wrote about patriarchal stress disorder and sort of how it limits women professionally. It's like she sort of comes at it more from that angle that I would recommend. I want to make sure I get her name.
Looking at your bookshelves.
Yeah. Brittany Cooper has a beautiful book called Eloquent Rage that's specifically about Black women and their experience of anger and patriarchal conditioning. A couple strategies that I would say work well for me and that I often encourage clients to do. So when we go into fight or flight, a lot of times what we need in order to activate the parasympathetic nervous system is to fight or flee. Like, literally, that is what your body wants to do. Now, some of us can just get up and go for a run midday. A lot of people can't, and we definitely can't go around fighting people. But what you can do is go up against a wall and just place your hands on the wall and push as hard as you can. And what that does is it activates what we call the defensive muscle network. So the same muscles that you would use to fight someone, you are activating, and it sends a signal to your brain of like, okay, we're fighting back, we're protecting ourselves, I am not helpless, I'm defending myself. It's kind of a way to access that without actually fighting someone, which is good. So that's one that I really like. I also encourage clients to keep a list like in their phone or have a journal of wins, of like times that they set boundaries and either it went okay, like they thought the person was going to be really upset with them and they weren't, or the person was upset and they were able to tolerate it. So that in moments when you're like, oh, I have to like set this boundary with my boss or my partner, whoever it might be, and I'm feeling really anxious, I don't feel like I can do it, you can go back and read through and be like, oh, yeah, 6 months ago I had to do something similar and it was really scary, but actually it went okay. I had built it up, you know, much worse in my head, which is what a lot of people tend to do.
That's a really great strategy. Those are so easy to implement, right? And it's really good practices. So tell my audience where they can find you if they want to learn more about you and follow you.
Yeah, I am on Instagram at madwomanlauren. My practice is called Mad Woman Therapy, so that's where that comes from. It is based on Taylor Swift's song. And so, yeah, I post there every day. If you're interested in Taylor Swift, head over to @TaylorSwiftPod. We would love to see you over there as well. But yeah, I'm very accessible on Instagram. I answer DMs all the time. Folks are also welcome to email me, lauren@madwomantherapy.com. If you're in a state that isn't one that I practice in, but you're like, oh, I want to work with someone like her, feel free to reach out and I will help you find someone. That's probably one of the biggest things, one of the biggest like services I provide my Instagram followers, because it can be really hard to find a therapist and the right kind of therapist. But if you know where to look, it's actually not that tricky. So yeah, if you're like, okay, I live in Nevada and this sounds great, I need to find someone, but you haven't had any luck, please reach out and I would be more than happy to do my own search.
Thank you so much. And just from the bottom of my heart, I just have to say, from one woman to another, I appreciate the message you're putting out in the world, the people that you're helping. Even though you're helping your clients in your area, your Instagram impacted me. And I just really appreciate that you are putting so much effort into something that's so important and needed.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's so kind.
Thank you so much for coming on, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. If you're ready to take the next step in transforming your life, be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And if something resonated with you today, I'd love to hear about it. Share your thoughts, tag me on social media, or leave a review to help others find the podcast. Remember, the smallest shifts can create the biggest transformations. I look forward to hearing from you.